Hi, you're listening to the Colin Flaherty podcast. Now, normally on this podcast, we talk about black mob violence, black on white crime. You know the drill. Black on white, black on old, black on young, black on gay, black on straight, black on Eskimos, black on Amish, black on kitties, puppies, turtles. A few days from now, we're going to add another category to that. Black on fish. Yeah, fish in an aquarium, but that's for another couple days. But not today. And we also talk about reporters and how they're in denial, deceit, and delusion about it. But we're going to change our lane today because this story, it's not weird. It's just interesting, and maybe you'll get a kick out of it as much as I got a kick out of it. Have you ever known anybody that was famous or just became famous kind of all of a sudden? When I think of that in my own life, I think of a kid I went to grade school with. His name is Mark McLean. He became the captain of Notre Dame's football team, which in our neighborhood was the equivalent of a kid, somebody in the neighborhood growing up to become Pope. But we all knew Mark, and Mark was a gifted athlete from his very earliest days. I went to school with him for 12 years, two little Catholic schools, and off he went to Notre Dame. Bing, bam, boom, captain of the team. I'm also thinking of maybe something a little more sinister. Anne Rule. I mean, any of you ever read any of her novels? She writes crime novels. She actually wrote a crime novel about good old Wilmington, Delaware, about the murder of Anne Marie Fahey by one of the governor's most trusted confidants. Anyway, her first book, she wrote her first book after she figured out she was sitting next to a serial killer. I forget how the story goes, whether it was a month or a year or 2 years or 3 years. But she had a job, not like a high-flying editorial job 50 stories above the streets of Manhattan. I think she had kind of a very, very modest job. I think she may have shared a desk or shared a cubicle, shared an office with Ted Bundy, the notorious mass murderer. The guy known for his charm. Anyway, Anne looks up one day and he goes, "Oh, there's Ted Bundy. He's just been arrested for being the most prolific and mass murderer in America." So in my own case, it kind of started a year ago, but it kind of hit the head this week. Somebody I've known for over 25 years. Somebody I've been to his house, played golf with many times, visited casinos with, had Thanksgiving dinners with, been running with, sat in his massage chair at his house and turned it on and felt the rollers going up and down my back. A guy I did a television show with for 5 years in San Diego, a San Diego public affairs show. A major Democrat / liberal / environmentalist. He was all over the news this week. He is now President Trump's point guy on tariffs, and he's been that way for a year. Does anybody remember the name Peter Navarro? Do you news hounds out there recognize the name Peter Navarro? Let's listen to a minute or so of some clips of Mr. Navarro in the news this week.
We need it. We need it even for defense. We're going to have new jobs popping up. We're going to have much more vibrant companies.
The move is designed to boost domestic production of U.S. metals. And despite a lukewarm response from conservatives to Trump's tariffs, Peter Navarro, assistant to president and director of the White House National Trade Council, says that no one should be surprised. President Trump has been fighting for workers since day one.
No surprise here. The candidate Trump, 2016, said he was going to defend American workers against unfair trade practices, build up our defense industrial base, build up our manufacturing base. Today was a strong step towards that. You know what was beautiful about today? The people in that room. We had the top executives from the steel companies and the aluminum companies. The president went around and asked them, what did they need to keep steel and aluminum in this country? We're in danger of losing those two industries. This was about national defense, national security, economic security, manufacturing jobs, and he came in, as he has been doing, with a measured response that'll be very effective in keeping our jobs here. So I think this was a great day for America.
What I think the president wants to do in terms of the World Trade Organization is send a very strong signal to them across the board on this issue of trade that we're not going to take it anymore. What we have is a country here in the United States which has the lowest tariffs in the world, lowest non-tariff barriers in the world, and all we get from that is not fair and reciprocal trade from our trading partners. What we get from that is $500 billion a year in trade deficits that put our wealth offshore and our jobs offshore. And a lot of the problem has been the World Trade Organization, which is over 160 countries, and a lot of them simply don't like us. And so we don't get good results there. So we're free traders. Let's be clear about that. Everyone in that White House is a free trader, but we are fair and reciprocal traders, and the World Trade Organization, I think, needs to change with the times.
So when I first met Navarro, I was a reporter writing for a couple of different magazines and newspapers in San Diego, including one called the San Diego Reader, another called San Diego Magazine. So I would, I wrote about politics. I wrote about other things. I would write about him from time to time. Nothing, scandalous or anything like that. But he was kind of a fresh face on the San Diego scene. I don't even want to think about the dates on this, but let's just say the 90s. He was kind of a fresh face on the San Diego scene. He came in and he started a group. Now, Peter Navarro, I read in the San Diego paper today, they had a story about him where they talked to a couple people I knew about him because of his newfound visibility. They called him a populist. And they were trying to make comparisons between him and Trump as a populist. No, at the time, nobody was calling him a populist. He wasn't calling himself a populist. He was a liberal. He was a Democrat. He was the big dog, big kahuna of all the liberal environmentalists in San Diego. So the liberal environmentalists in San Diego, I know that's probably redundant, but it was mostly an affluent white crowd in the northern part of San Diego. Every once in a while, they'd throw a bone down to the people that lived in the city or in the less affluent parts, saying, "Oh, we're for you too. We're gonna fight environmental racism," that kind of stuff. But most of the time, his crowd was the Volvo driving, Subaru driving. They had a certain lifestyle up there, nice houses, very affluent lifestyle. So Peter burst on the scene with a group he started called Prevent Los Angelesation Now, PLAN. I don't even remember the details of the plan other than it was a plan directed at developers to stop development. Now, I know all this about Peter because by the time that plan rolled around, by the time he became even more of a bigger dog in San Diego politics, I was no longer a reporter. I was running my own PR and marketing firm, and I was assigned on more than one occasion to do some opposition research on Mr. Peter Navarro. That's how I got to know him. Now, Peter Navarro, again, this wasn't the kind of opposition research where you'd go into somebody's trash can or you'd go through the bank records. I am sure I must have done some of that, but it became pretty clear pretty quickly that Peter Navarro was just what you saw on the surface. This was just a guy who felt deeply about these liberal and environmental democratic issues. He was part of the democratic machinery out there, such as it was. And, he did kind of want to jump in line to that machinery by doing this initiative. He was a professor of economics somewhere in San Diego. Was it? I even forget. Was it San Diego State, University of San Diego? I even forget. I should know this. But he had, so I did the research, and in the course of that, I read his books. At the time, he was kind of an energy economist. So I read all of his books, and his books were, I think, it's been so long. I'm just going to say this. There's a chance this might not be 100% accurate, but he was kind of an alternative energy person. He was kind of talking about the economics of coal and the economics of this kind of energy and that kind of energy. Every time he was, I remember reading one of his books and he was on energy and he was kind of going down the road full speed ahead, right in the direction of nuclear. But as soon as he got like an inch from there, he just did a wide berth around it and never mentioned nuclear again. So he was an economist. He is a doctorate in econ, but he was a very political person. So he ran for a mayor after I don't think his plan thing passed. I'm not going to go back and look this up. It was a very big deal. He was clearly identified really early on as the boogeyman of San Diego liberal politics. The people I know, the people I like, the people who I did some work for from time to time were big landowners in San Diego, big home builders, big developers. Those are three different groups of people, by the way. And, they identified him as the boogeyman right away. And I never disagreed with that because that's who he was to them. That's what I was telling them he was, because he was. He was unapologetic about it. He thought the developers had too much influence. He thought the developers were ruining the pristine environment of San Diego. And they didn't make any bones about that. I mean, that's the people he attracted were all down with kicking the hell out of the developers, supporting candidates who didn't like development, blah, blah, blah. And lots, Southern California being for development, and California all over the place. If you're in favor of somebody who owning a piece of property by putting one brick on top of that brick, well, that makes you a bad person. So if you're going to be a good person, you are against that. So Navarro, he ran for mayor, and I think that's kind of how I got to know him a little bit. He ran for mayor after the initiative. He lost the mayoral election, he won the primary. And San Diego's a nonpartisan system, so the top two finishers face off in November. So he won the primary, and he got beat by Susan Golding in the general election. I think that's when he started a TV show. He had a TV show on Sundays. It was called Navarro's News Behind the News. I wasn't doing as much newspaper and magazine reporting anymore. I was probably doing more magazine writing for San Diego Magazine than anywhere else, but that was just strictly a, one-off thing every now and then. But even so, I was, at least in my own, at least in some circles, I was known as one of the few people in San Diego who ever made a living putting ink to paper who actually was a conservative. So I was the designated conservative for, I forget how long the show ran, 3, 4, 5 years. It was every Sunday. I used to take my kids to the studio. There was a studio. It was a public access show. We were on every Sunday. And we found a little bit of an audience. He was the moderator. He had a couple, it was usually him and me and he and I, and a couple of other liberals. So it was really like 3 liberals versus 1. I kicked their butts every single week in and week out, didn't pull any punches. But I really got a chance to know Peter. I got a chance to know the people around him. And they were nice people. Most of the people I met, him and the people around him, they were nice. I liked them. They invited me into their homes. And I treated them with respect. They treated me with respect. Everything was good. But at the same time, on the air, off the air, I would look them in the eye and say, listen, you guys are against everything. You don't believe in property rights. You don't believe in free enterprise. You don't believe in, people making money through entrepreneurship. And especially for my boys in the home building industry on some level or another, you guys simply are not going to be happy until every single person who carries a hammer around his belt is out of a job. I said that 100 times on the air, off to there, to Navarro and every single one of his acolytes. And, they would usually just shrug it off as, it's just Colin, making a point. But it's absolutely the truth. That's what I would tell my boys in the home building business. This is what these guys, how they acted every single time, whether it was, on one day they'd be down there at the Board of Supervisors or the City Council explaining why they need home builders to spend $10,000 per home on putting these. It sounds good. It sounds like you prevent storm water runoff. So you get these like tubes filled with hay and you line your property with them. That prevents a lot of runoff from going. The runoff, of course, is just rainwater. It never rains out there. The runoff is rainwater. It goes into a sewer pipe, goes right out into the ocean. In other words, you're going to dump some rainwater mixed with some dirt into the ocean, and they consider that a major environmental hazard. Navarro, it's hard to overstate his influence during that time, and how he definitely was the big kahuna of all the environmentalists in San Diego. Again, one of my clients, they built the San Diego Convention Center expansion. And so I was in on it a little bit, doing this, doing that. But the environmentalists would show up and go, listen, because what you do is when you build something, it was right on the bay. Any of you guys have been to San Diego, that big, huge convention center is right on the bay. And when you build a building like that, you're going to have some water leaking in from the bay into the parking garage or into the structure itself. So they build for that. They make a pump. So what you do is you get a pump and you pump the water, it comes in, it goes out right back to the bay. No big deal, right? No, to environmentalists, to Navarro's crowd in San Diego, everything was a big deal. Everything. So it turns out, so they were going down there. I'm not saying Navarro did this, but his buddies were there. And this is his kind of thing he was in favor of. They went down to the city council and the board of supervisors saying, "Oh, the convention center, they're dumping polluted water in the bay." It's kind of a big deal. So one of the engineer I know said, "Yeah, we're dumping polluted water in the bay. What we do is the water comes in from the bay, but it gets filtered through all the dirt and the rocks and everything, the construction material site, and then it hits the pool or the collection point, and they just take it there and they throw it right back out. The water that goes out into the bay was cleaner than the water in the bay." So technically, if you went on to San Diego Bay, you picked up a glass full of water and you put it back into the bay, you were a polluter. And that's the case they were making. And that's the kind of case probably not 1 in 100 reporters in that crazy little town ever figured out. They just knew that somehow the convention center was turning into an environmental disaster because that's the way reporters and environmentalists roll in San Diego. So we did this show for 5 years. And it was a lot of fun. I remember one time, my kids, my kids liked Peter. He liked my kids. My kids, they hung around there. They watched all these cameras going. They watched the control room. Peter's wife was there, a very nice woman. I played golf with Peter, played golf with her many times. But we were in a running group on Sundays. Used to go running with her. She was one of the top runners in San Diego. Very, very accomplished and nice person. But, Peter was a very charming guy and a very funny guy. And he used to talk about how he was the best fundraiser in San Diego. And then he would wait for a beat or two to wait for the other shoe to drop. And he would say, yeah, every time he runs for office, whoever's running against him raises $1 gajillion because you absolutely did not have to work very hard. If you were a conservative or a property owner in San Diego running for office, and if you were running against Navarro, yeah, you would find a lot of people who were quite eager to support your cause because he was the boogeyman. He was the devil incarnate. He was the great liberal environmentalist that was going to shut everything in San Diego down. And I'm just telling you, I knew this better than anybody at San Diego because developers did not hang around with Peter Navarro the way I did. Neither did landowners. So I was something of a Navarro whisperer. I read his books. I think Peter one time actually had me do something for him. It just involved going down to the TV stations. Remember, we've done videos here about how you can go down to a TV station and inspect their public file to see who's complaining about what. And the TV managers, they don't tell you this, but the station managers, they live in deathly fear of usually the fellas or their lovely ladies going down to the station and filing a complaint that somehow their station is not being responsive to people of color and their community. They're not running enough positive stories. They're running too many negative stories. They haven't hired enough black people. They haven't even tried to hire enough black people. That's the kind of thing that can add a long time to your license renewal. That's the kind of thing that can add a lot of lawyers' fees to your license renewal. That's the kind of thing that can make it really hard for you to sell your station. If you're one of these guys that owns 20, 30, 40, 50 stations, you don't want those FCC complaints in that file. You just don't. The worst case scenario is they will yank your TV license from you and radio license too. So anyway, I think Navarro sent me down to some TV station to check the file to see if there was any funny business. I think if there was any funny business, this was after an election, if there was any funny business about advertising, because he was under the impression that the stations were not running his ads. By the time he sent a check-in, his campaign sent a check-in for the ads, the station would say, well, we're done. We don't have any inventory. We sold out our ads. And it turns out the campaign against him had been buying ads, a couple weeks ahead of time. They were trying to buy him a couple days ahead of time. And that's where he got jammed up, and that's where he was unhappy. So I don't really remember how that turned out, other than it was probably just like, well, you should have bought your ads sooner. I mean, that was kind of a thing in San Diego for a good 24 hours. People were wondering, were the stations conspiring to stop Peter Navarro's ads for when he ran for mayor from appearing on television. So he ran for mayor once, ran for mayor again, won the primary both times lost to General. All during this time, we're doing this show, especially during the second, before and after the second race. Then he ran for Congress a little bit later on. Now during this time, I'm in this running group with a lot of Navarro's buddies. We would always meet on a Sunday. We talk about going off topic. This is like off the topic, but this was interesting. So somebody in our group, she was kind of a running guru and knew a little bit about. Her thing was, and she didn't make this up. She got it. I'll remember the guy's name in a minute who kind of invented this. But we were all training for half marathons, and she would say, "Listen, do your running during the week. Use this schedule. You're probably going to run a lot less than you think." Especially when you start out, maybe 1-2 miles a couple times a week. Then you go 3-4 a couple times a week. But on the weekends, you just run 1 mile longer than your previous longest run. So we'd start out at, 1 mile, 2 miles, 3 miles. I remember the first time I ran 6 miles. It was like, wow, that's a long way, 6 miles. I mean, how did I ever do that? But then we just kept doing it every Sunday. We just kept going on and on and on. I don't think Peter was part of this group, but his lovely wife was. And there's been like 10 of us there. And I remember in week 20, we're running 20 miles on a Sunday. And from one part of North San Diego up to Oceanside, San Diego. And man, I remember getting to that 6 mile mark and feeling, hey, I'm just getting warmed up now. I mean, that was like Mount Everest just a few weeks before. Then all of a sudden it turns into, that means we're just getting started now. Boy, really, when you do that long distance running for any period of time, I probably should get back into it. Play too much golf, don't run enough. You really do see that a lot of the barriers that you have in your life, they're in your head. They're barriers that you put there. That's probably why I'm not as sympathetic to the fellas as a lot of people are when I hear that they're relentless victims of relentless white racism all the time, everywhere. That explains everything. I mean, that's kind of a macro thing. On a micro thing, on a personal level, I mean, I feel like looking everybody in the eye and say, listen, you don't get any excuses here. Nobody cares about your excuses. So just get on with it. And if you're waiting for Shaun King or Ta-Nehisi Coates or anybody else, Al Sharpton or Jesse Jackson, to come into your life and fill it with grace and joy and prosperity, if you're waiting for that, good Lord, you're like the person in this long distance run. They would just be sitting at Jack in the Box while the rest of us are, running up and down the coast. You don't get any brownie points for watching somebody else participate in the race, in the game of life. I don't know if Navarro would have been down with that kind of rugged individual kind of thing. I mean, he was an economist. I presume he was at least familiar. I mean, all economists know who Ayn Rand is. They pretty much all say she was an awful person because she was an awful person. I don't know if Peter ever said that. Anyway, so Peter was an energy economist. And after a while, we kind of went our separate ways a little bit. I moved up to a different part of North San Diego. I think Peter he took a job. He ran for Congress, and he was not successful in that. He had Hillary Clinton. Hillary Clinton came to town for him like a couple days before the election. Must have been, I want to say it was 96 he ran for Congress, because I think Bill Clinton was doing the re-election thing. So Hillary Clinton runs in for San Diego for Navarro, And I knew all the people running his campaign. I, just go to their house. I'd say, they would go. I remember seeing them once, and they showed me the Sunday paper. There's a picture of Hillary and Peter Navarro on the front page of the San Diego Union Tribune. And they were all fired up. It was like, oh, Colin, did you see this, man? This is fantastic. I said, well, did you actually poll to make sure that the people in that district are down with Hillary? Because this paper is not doing Peter Navarro any favors. The San Diego Union Tribune, such as it was not known as a liberal bastion, even though it was owned by a guy named David Copley, who was known for leading a liberal lifestyle. That's all I'll say about that. But, the editorial board was, let's just say, at one time it was conservative. Let's just say they lost their way, became moderates. Anyway, nobody was going to, but they weren't really down with Navarro. And so putting his picture on the front page of that paper told me that they were not doing him any favors. So he did not win that election. You know who knows Navarro really well in a very piercing way? Does the name Roger Hitchcock sound familiar? Roger was the mayor of San Diego, a job Peter Navarro aspired to more than once. Then I remember after Roger left the mayorship, under, say, difficult circumstances, he started a talk show in San Diego in the 80s. Good Lord, he was the best talk show host in America right off the bat, especially the best local talk show host in America. Nobody was even second to that. Boy, Roger was so good. I remember him talking about NAFTA. Roger was never down with NAFTA. Okay, I'm your, average, whatever, conservative. I'm not going to go around reading the foreign trade documents. I'm just not. So if somebody tells me that NAFTA was free trade, I'm one of those guys that'll say, okay, I like free trade. I understand the economics of it. If you make, if you make shoes and you make cars, I mean, I can make shoes less expensive than you can, and you can make cars less expensive than I can. I'll stop making cars, you stop making shoes, and all of a sudden we have created wealth from these specialties that we both pursue. I mean, that's like high school economics. But Roger wasn't having any of that. I think Roger Hitchcock actually read the NAFTA documents. And he was raising the red flag on NAFTA for a long time. I wasn't really down with Roger about that. But I don't know. If Trump's right, today, Roger was a prophet and way ahead of his time then. But Roger was no fan of Peter Navarro. I mean, Roger, he used to look at Navarro's proposals, and he would look them in the eye, and he would call Navarro on the phone. And sometimes the exchanges between these two guys got very, very testy. Very testy. It's my way of saying Roger would sometimes actually lose his temper a little bit and, tell the people exactly what he thought about Navarro. It wasn't exactly the kind of stuff you'd want to reprint on a campaign brochure. Roger had such a huge audience in San Diego. They all depended on him. And I think Navarro always wanted to be closer to Roger, and he tried a few times. He just couldn't do it. Roger just wasn't buying it. So anyway, we went our separate ways. I went to North County, and Peter eventually, after he lost for Congress, he moved up to Orange County to take a job at UC Irvine as a professor of economics. I think he was, but when you say these terms, they're all such loaded with meaning. I think he actually did become a professor there. He had, and so Peter's specialty at the time was energy. So just by a weird coincidence, my big buddy, the only person I know, him and his wife in Orange County, he just recently died. His name was Tony Finizza. Tony Finizza used to be the head of economics. He was the chief economist for Arco, the big oil company in Los Angeles. And I remember going out with Tony more than on one occasion, and I'd say, how's Peter Navarro doing up there? So he didn't know Peter really as a political person. Tony wasn't really that political anyway. He was a teacher, and I think he had a consulting gig on the side. But he said his colleagues liked him. The people in the energy business liked him. Energy economists liked him. I think my buddy Tony might have been the president one year of American Energy Economists Association, whatever that main trade group is. He was the big dog in it. I think they recognized Peter Navarro with some kind of award one year. So whatever he did in San Diego, you know, doing the we shall overcome, screw the developers, screw the landowners, screw the new home buyers. Let's just build all sorts of low-income housing so we can put poor people in there, and that'll be good enough for me. As long as we don't hurt any birds and bees and flowers and trees. That didn't really spill over totally or even that much into his energy economics. Now, at this point, I had read everything Peter had ever done, but to tell you the truth, I kind of lost track of him. But he didn't. There was one point, though, he didn't lose track of me. And I think I'm always kind of careful now to say who's my friend, who's not my friend, because in this line I have chosen, talking about racial violence wildly out of proportion, black violence wildly out of proportion, and reporters in denial, deceit, and delusion about it. I'm very careful about saying who's my friend and who's not, because I don't want to get my friends in trouble. I don't worry about that with Navarro, because I think the last thing I heard about him was he was kind of unhappy with me. Peter Navarro, he had a lot of charm, a lot of charisma, a lot of friends, but that also means when you're like that, that also means there are people out there that do not think highly of you. People out there that were just not down with good old Peter Navarro. I was not one of those people, by the way. But Peter thought because I was supposed to be the big master kahuna of opposition research in San Diego, that at some point I was, even though he wasn't running for office anymore, I had continued my pursuit of him in opposition research, which wasn't true, because good old Colin doesn't do professional work unless somebody drops a few coins in the tin cup, if you catch my meaning. I've actually lost a bunch of clients because of this pursuit, and I understand that. And there's no hard feelings at all among the people who were retaining me. Now they find it impossible to retain me because of the intense nature of the subject. Anyway, at some point, Peter Navarro was telling people he was very unhappy with me because somebody was spreading, I've never saw these emails, I don't know what's in them, somebody was spreading emails around about him that weren't flattering, and apparently good old Colin was supposed to be the one doing it. I wasn't doing it. So anyway, so Navarro is now ensconced up in Irvine, California, UC Irvine. University of California. There's some smart people in that institution, no doubt about that. But he kind of switches gears, and I didn't hear about this till kind of recently. He switched gears from energy over to international trade, and he started writing books about China. And these weren't just dry, like, hey, what's up with China? How are they manipulating the currency? No, these were serious. What the hell is China doing to us? In other words, Peter Navarro had singled out the Chinese as the villains, as the unrequited, unredeemable villains, in the same way he had singled out the developers in San Diego as the unrequited, unredeemable villains, the subject of all his intense economic analytical powers, same way he did to the Chinese. He wrote a couple books. He made a documentary about it. You guys want to listen to a few minutes of the documentary? We'll listen to the first couple minutes of it, and I might even talk over some of it, because some of it's just visual. Okay, so the name of the documentary is Death by China.
Hi, I'm Peter Navarro, director of Death by China. For 3 years, this documentary film was one of the most popular on Netflix, and now you can watch the official version for free. So enjoy the show, and afterwards, check out my new book and film, Crouching Tiger, What China's Militarism Means for the World. And please, help defend America and protect your family. Don't buy made in China. You're going to be okay?
I'm 63 years old. I'm likely to skate my way to the grave. But I have 3 young children.
So Navarro's talking to a steel producer.
And I worry about their ability to work in American manufacturing down the road.
Now we're looking at a ball that looks like it's something to do with jobs and how jobs are leaving the United States. It's graphically represented. Oh, now the ball turns into a red sun. The ball is rolling towards China under a picture of Chairman Mao. Bam! The website is called crouchingtiger.net. Here's the graphics. In 2001, China joined the World Trade Organization and immediately began flooding American markets with illegally subsidized exports. 57,000 American factories have since disappeared. More than 25 million Americans can't find a decent job. And now we owe more than $3 trillion to the world's largest totalitarian nation.
I think that the water's going to get hotter and hotter, and if there's no event to wake people up, I think China can just own more and more and more and more of our debt, and everything's fine until that magical moment when it's not, and all the sorries in the world aren't going to make that any different.
The film you're about to see addresses one of the most urgent problems facing America.
There's a picture of a big knife going into the heart of America.
Rapidly rising China. As you watch this film, it is important to always distinguish clearly between the good and hard-working people of China and their repressive communist government, now victimizing both American and Chinese citizens.
Now we're seeing blood dripping down in the title of the thing. Death by China, narrated by Martin Sheen. That's a tip-off. So now we're going out to Best Buy, Thanksgiving Eve, 2015. There's a long line of people waiting to buy stuff. Navarro's going to ask them, where you got your stuff?
I'm here to buy me a big screen TV. My first big screen, man. 40 inch, about 265.
Midnight, Black Friday. Lots of people crowding into Best Buy.
Where's that product made?
Probably in China.
China.
This is made in China.
Do you know where that bike was made?
No, but I know it's healthy.
Where were these products made, do you know?
Probably from China, where everything else made.
Oh, made in America.
Well, American is better.
So is this American?
I'm not sure if it is American, but hopefully it is.
Yeah, I think I got a great deal. Can't beat $300 for a 46-inch TV.
Tell you the truth, I didn't even come here exactly for this, but I seen it and couldn't pass up the deal, man. For, $200, you can't really, beat that. So they told me it was $200, and now it's in my cart now,
Did you see where it was made?
Oh yeah, it was made in China. Hey, I'm fine with it. If the American people can't provide me with what I need, I gotta get it from China. Hey, it is what it is, I'm just being truthful, Don't hate me.
For every action, says the screen, there's an equal and opposite reaction. Now we're showing some buttons, flags made in China. Now we're showing hollowed out factories, one after another. My grandfather was a steel worker, by the way. That factory is hollowed out now too. In Lebanon, Pennsylvania, he worked for Lebanon Steel. I think there's a little bit more to this factory thing that we haven't talked about. We'll talk about it in a minute.
So how do you feel when Americans buy Chinese products?
I feel really bad because what happened is not just America buying a Chinese product, which is American people losing their jobs.
I was laid off 3 times within 6 months until I was permanently laid off.
I graduated with my bachelor's in 2004. I've been out trying to use that, of course, because I spent a lot of money going to school, and I haven't been able to find anything.
China, I think, is responsible for wiping out a good deal of the manufacturing that we have or had in Northeast Ohio. And I think that is continuing as they continue to manipulate their currency, as they continue to not have the level of workplace safety or environmental or health standards that we have here in the United States.
So we've seen our whole manufacturing base uproot and replant in a place where you can commit crimes against workers and just go out to dinner that night.
So when a large company decides to move its production offshore and it closes a factory in a city or a town in the United States, that basically leaves, it's like a black hole. Suddenly that factory just disappears and everything else goes down with it.
Jobs disappear, and the way the economy is going right now, it's tough to find a job. I just recently finished graduate school, and even coming out with that, it's still hard to find one.
Some of the workers at companies, literally their last act at the factory was to unbolt the machine and load it up to be shipped off to China.
I even talked to a fellow down there. They wanted to send him over to China to teach the people how to run the machines that they were shipping over there. He was 63 years old. He said, I only got 2 more years to go and I can retire, so I'm not going to bother doing it. He said, bad enough they took my job, now they want me to show them how to do it too.
People who were supplying that plant with materials, equipment, maintenance services, even the accounting firms, design firms, R&D firms, and then all the other services around it like restaurants, what happens to them? They're doomed. They go down with it. They can't follow that company offshore to Shanghai.
It's difficult to be unemployed because you have a mortgage and you have your regular bills you have to pay. You have to pay for a car and you have to put food on the table. And when you have just a small amount of money from the state coming in, sometimes it's hard to make it.
So the documentary goes on like that with lots of numbers, lots of facts and figures for the next 1 hour. It's a Netflix documentary. I think it did pretty well. Good for you, Peter Navarro. You know, it's easy when you listen to documentaries like that or talk to other people about the advantages China has in dealing with in trade advantages. Do you get a picture in your mind of like third world factories with leaky roofs and people, being chained to their work desks while they make your new iPhone? Well, I have to confess, my image wasn't that far from that until I learned a little bit different. I was working for a CEO. This guy I'd done work for him in a couple different capacities in a couple different companies when he was CEO. And each time he would manufacture stuff in China, whether it was a solar panel or something to do with water, something to do with sewer pipes or energy. He would go over there. He would go to China. And I used to see the pictures. I used to talk to him about it. And the thing about it is, what I didn't know, which I'm not hearing anybody acknowledge here, is that China has some of the best factories in the world and the best workers in the world. So I understand making the Chinese the boogeyman, putting a tariff on there, going to the negotiation table and say, listen, you guys have to change this and change this. And hopefully that's the way it'll work. They put a 25% tariff on this, and maybe the other guys will get the message that they better quit gaming the system, which is what Trump and Navarro say they are doing. Maybe it'll work like that. But the Chinese do not have a temporary advantage, where they have more than just a temporary advantage because they're gaming the monetary system. They have great factories. People who are happy to work in them. People who are happy to build them. People who are encouraged to build them. A government, a communist government, that is quite happy to encourage you to build them, even if it means in a place like Beijing, basically it's unlivable for Westerners for a good part of the year, because if you want to see the sun in Beijing, you must take a train outside of Beijing and go for a couple of hours. Then you will find some sunshine. That's how bad the pollution is over there. I acknowledge all that. But here to me is the weird thing about putting Navarro in this position of the point guy on trade. We're going to bring he's quite vocal about how we're going to bring the aluminum business back. We're going to bring the steel business back. Look, these are big. Have you ever been near a steel plant? These are big, dirty places. That's where people make a lot of money, where people raise families, where people send their kids to college and buy nice cars and take vacations. That's what happens when you work in a place like that over a period of time, if you stick it out. But if you ever wanted to build an aluminum factory or a steel mill anywhere close to San Diego, anywhere in California, I don't think it would be possible. I just don't think it would be possible because the enviros out there, and I include Peter Navarro right at the top of the list of people who are considered environmentalists in San Diego, they're just not into anybody building anything because there's always a reason why. They're just control freaks. They're afraid of the future, so they try to control the future. And they're just control freaks. They don't like anything being built, especially if they think somebody's going to make $1 or $2 on it. They just don't like it. I was involved in a lot of projects out there, and this is the way it worked for people who weren't listening to good old Colin whispering in their ear. The enviros would show up, including many of the people in Peter Navarro's circle. They would show up and go, yeah, well, we're not against your project, you understand. We just don't really like the location of it. Okay, that's basically, that's environmental speak for F you. Or we're not against your project. We would just like to do some more environmental studies on it. That doesn't sound unreasonable, does it? Until you learn the environmental studies take a year or 2 or 3. And during that year or 2 or 3, they're going to be in the papers, in the TV, on the radio, on the web, every damn day spreading lies about your project. And when you come back with your environmental studies and you go, oh yeah, we hired some greenies at the university who are your friends too. We paid them a lot of money. Here's the report saying this is all okay for the birds, the bees, and the flowers and the trees. As a matter of fact, the way these guys are going to build their project, we're going to have more birds, bees, flowers, trees out there. And I swear, 9 times out of 10, the environmentalists look at you going like, oh, what are you talking about? I don't remember asking for any study. I don't care about your study. We don't like your project. No, we're just against it. We're just against it. We're against all development, period. They would reject that characterization of it. They would just say, no, we just want, reasonable development. We just want development where the cost of a new house is increased by $400,000, $500,000 a house, and you can't be, just for the regulations. You can't be against that, Colin, can you? So Navarro there's so many people who are so surprised that Navarro ended up in this White House because he didn't usually run with that crowd. I think Trump found his books. Trump gave him a nice blurb on a couple of his books in his video saying, "This you got to pay attention to this to see how China's eating our lunch." But so many people in San Diego who are big Trump supporters, they're just, every day they look at each other and go, yeah, I'm a little surprised Navarro is still there. They didn't think he would be there in the first place. They didn't think he would last that long because there's so many things happening in that administration that are counter to what the libs and the environmentalists want to do. I was one of them who was saying, I don't think he's going to last that long. I think he's just going to walk out, say, F you, I'm not down with everything. I'm down with the trade, but I'm not down with what you're doing at the EPA. I'm not down with how you're messing with Korea. I'm not down with all the tweets. That's what I thought was going to happen. And the wall, the enviros and other Navarro acolytes in San Diego hate the wall. They hate it without reservation, without hesitation. They hate the wall. Which goes to show you that's why I never try to predict the future around here, because it's against the law in the state of New York and I'm not particularly good at it. But the weird thing is, Trump's done some development in California. He did it very successfully. I mean, there's a golf course up in, I want to say, North Orange County or South Palos Verdes, so it would be South Los Angeles County. Big golf course, a beautiful course, but, one day a big storm came in and just took off a big chunk of the 18th hole. Trump bought it. He had to restore it. But to do anything in California on the coast, you have to go to the Coastal Commission. For most people, that's a nightmare. Especially if you're new. It's like, oh yeah, go through this hoop, that hoop, this hoop, that hoop, come back 10 years. No, I thought it was going to be a 10-year gig. I just didn't think they were going to give it to him. I knew somebody involved in it, and I was constantly expressing surprise with how quickly and with such expertise they were getting through the system. I think they got through in about a year. That course is now, I don't know, it's called Trump National and Palos Verdes, whatever it's called. I think they play at LPGA event there. Lots of environmental restrictions on it. You have to put aside a lot of land for certain kind of birds and bees and flowers and trees and shrubs, and You know, that kind of stuff. But see, Trump, I mean, good Lord, if anybody's the face of a real estate developer in this country, on this planet, it's Trump. Navarro is not down with the real estate developers. I don't know how I could say it any more plainly than that. And by the way, if Peter Navarro knocked on my door right now, or with or without his lovely wife Janet, I don't know if they're still married or not. If they knocked on my door, I'd stop this podcast and I'd go shake his hand. I'd give him both the big abrazo and I'd congratulate him for all the success he's enjoyed in Washington, D.C. And since then, I mean, I always liked him. I liked his family. I knew who they were and they knew who I was, and everybody was fine with it. I mean, they tried to entertain me. I tried to entertain them. But at the same time, I mean, he's not down with the real estate developers like Trump. Who's going to be? When I looked at these, you saw when you heard part of the documentary, you heard about all these hollowed out factories, all these factories closing, all these jobs leaving. Okay, maybe the Chinese are the boogeyman doing part of it. But good Lord, we simply cannot relieve the environmentalists like Navarro for responsibility for forcing a lot of these companies out of this country. I mean, when you think of California, you think of all these great industries California used to have that aren't there anymore, whether it's making furniture or planes or this or that. They all just moved out. They just moved. They moved to another state. They moved to another country. And there's a lot of businesses in California they would leave today because of environmental regulation. They would leave today if they could, if they weren't locked into some long-term lease. I mean, some of these businesses, they're in leases 10, 20 years long. Plus, they have this enormous equipment they have to move. I mean, moving some of these companies is not a casual thing. So they stay and they hold their breath. And they go, every businessman in California is going, well, maybe I can hold my breath longer than they can. Because they've got to come up for air at some time. They've been so busy, so relentlessly trying to kill business and enterprise in California. I was out there for 35 years. I saw it firsthand. That's their thing. That's what they do. Every single thing is met with an objection. Want to bring some water down from Northern California to Southern California where there is no water? No can do. You're going to hurt the little fishies. God, I'll never forget driving down from San Francisco. I think you drive down the 5. It goes all the way up there, right? At one point, I probably drove this like 5 times in 3 months. My friends were up there. I'd go up and play golf with them. I'll never forget going through an area where a federal judge turned the water off from the river because he said the river, if the water dropped down below a certain level, that would hurt this little fish. Was that the so-called snail darter fish? I think it was. And so you go from miles and miles and miles, tens of miles, tens and tens and tens and tens of miles, and all you would see are lemon groves, orange groves, all kinds of different flowers and agricultural areas that were just desolate and abandoned because they couldn't get water. That's what environmentalism is in California. They just don't care about anybody who wants to make a buck. They don't think it's a big deal for a guy to get a job and have a job, have a family, have the picket fence, go to church, pay his taxes, do his thing. That's not that big of a deal to them. The snail darter is more important to them. That's not a caricature. That's not Colin stretching things to make a point. That is a plain fact of life. That is what Navarro and his buddies are out there. That's what they represent. And so now we're told that, we're going to bring manufacturing back to the United States by putting up tariffs. Okay. I hope it works out. Maybe we won't get into a trade war. Maybe the world won't end. I mean, that's the problem, right? The Democrats have already told us how many times was the world supposed to end in the last 6 months. If we pass this bill, the world's going to end. Pass that bill. World's going to end. Pass this bill. World's going to end. Well, this is definitely an action with certain world earth-shaking consequences. But now the little boy cried wolf too many times, and all of a sudden Peter Navarro, who could be construed the wolf, he rolls in and he goes, hey, everybody, anybody up for some tariffs on those big bad Chinese? Because they're cheating. They're factories. They're not playing fair and square. And anybody stands up and goes, hey, the Chinese, we're not, they're handing our lunch in expertise and research and development and skills. I know they're a bunch of commies, and the commies apparently have magical ways of manufacturing money and hard work and work ethic. Okay. But they're handing us our lunch. And if we're going to do this tariff thing, I mean, is that it now? We're now going to be a country where we're essentially begging the rest of the world for mercy when the world takes our, cleans our clock in these really important industrial areas? I don't see how that really works. But that's what I learned all this week watching Navarro, watching a lot of his conservative followers who have seen the light on this whole business of tariffs. That's what I learned this week as I watched one of America's most prominent, most visible, most effective no-growth politicians become the point man, the spokesman for jobs and growth that he has spent a whole career fighting against. I've heard the lovely Ann Coulter say how fantastic it was that off we go. Oh, and by the way, this has to be said. I'm not saying this is Ann Coulter doing this. But the lovely ladies, the lovely ladies love Peter Navarro. They thought he looked like Robert Redford. And, in case you haven't noticed, if a chick says you look like Robert Redford, that's a good thing, okay? That's a good thing. And I saw him this morning with Mike Wallace on Mike Wallace's show on Fox News, and I could see Navarro perfectly. He sat down, and he was doing the buddy guy thing with him, which he also does. This guy's not a chick hound by any means, but the chicks do enjoy him. But he sat down with Navarro, and he goes, hey, Chris, good to see you, my friend. Well, basically, Chris Wallace didn't give Navarro a moment's peace for 12 minutes. I've never seen Chris do an interview like that. He was badgering Navarro, cutting him off, wouldn't let Navarro finish. That's how strong some of these things are running on this tariff. Man, we're all in such new territory on all these new things. All we can do is sit back and hope that, maybe Navarro saw the light. Maybe he's not against free enterprise. He would reject my characterization of that. Maybe all that anti-development stuff down there, maybe I totally misinterpreted all of it. I doubt if there was anybody paying more attention to it than I was. I was the Navarro whisperer. And in Southern California, that really wasn't something that made many black kids angry.